everyone, my name is Allison Davis and I've got a process video for you today showing a design idea for using 6x6" paper pads on a full-size layout. I've been a big fan of scrapbooking with these smaller papers for quite a while. I've always enjoyed creating backgrounds on my layouts that are made up of smaller pieces, and 6x6 and 6x8" paper pads are so perfectly suited for cutting smaller pieces since the patterns on these papers have been shrunken down as well. It's not just a smaller sheet of paper, it's a smaller pattern as well. So you can get away with cutting really small pieces and still get a good representation of that pattern. For the layout in this video, I'm going to create an arrow strip background using the Echo Park Summer Vibes 6x6" paper pad. And I've got a fun little trick to show you when it comes to creating these arrow strips. To begin, I'm going to pick out the papers that I want to use. I love that this compact size makes it so easy and fast to pick and choose the papers that you want to use. I'm mostly going to use the solid color patterns and then a few with some multicolored patterns like the stripe, the leaves, and the dotted paper. After I have those papers selected, next I'm cutting a couple of 3/4 inch strips from each pattern paper. That is going to be the width of these arrow strips. And if you want to replicate this design, you can always adapt the strips width to different measurements. You can go smaller with 1/2 inch strips or larger with 1 inch, 1.5 inch, or even 2 inch. After I get these 3/4 inch strips cut from each pattern paper, I'll cut them again for the height measurements. Right now though, it's easiest to just cut a bunch of 3/4 inch strips first. For the height of these arrow strips, I'm using two different sizes that are going to be intermingled together throughout this design. The first is a 2¼ inch strip, and I'm cutting about 30 of those. Some of the papers I'm cutting 3 strips from one pattern, and then on others I'm cutting just 2 strips. That will bring me to 30 total. The ones that I cut 3 out of are the papers that I thought I would want to use the most, which ended up being the blue colors because I thought they went well with my photos. And then the orange was another one because there are little bits of orange in my son's swim trunks. And then I really liked the striped paper as well and thought it was a good way to tie all the colors of the layout together. I'm going to set these aside for right now and start in with cutting the smaller size. The second size I'm cutting them to is 1¼ inch. I don't think I'll need as many of these as I do the larger ones, and I'm really just trying to get a couple per pattern paper, so I ended up with a background design that has an even spread of color and pattern. Now with all of those strips cut, it's time to turn them into arrow strips. There will be a point at one end and then a notch cut out of the other. And my little scrapbooking life hack for making these is to use a hexagon punch. To make the arrow point at the top, you hold your hexagon punch upside down and then slide the strip through the opening of the hexagon and into the corner points in the middle. Then you make sure that the point is lined up in the center and punch. And now you've got an arrow point. To make the notched part at the bottom of the strip, this time you slide the strip into the punch from the side and again line up the point with the center of your strip and then punch. And now you've got your arrow strip with the point at the top and the notch at the bottom. So this punch is from Fiskars, and they actually have 3 sizes that I like to use, and all 3 work well for this technique. For the longer strips, I'm using the smallest hexagon punch, which is a 1 inch wide punch. And of course, if you have an electronic die cutting machine, you can just cut these with that. That's definitely easier and faster. But this punch option is great for those that don't have access to those types of machines. With the smaller strips, I had to switch to a larger hexagon punch. It was a little harder to work with the smaller punch for these strips, but it was super easy with the 1.5-inch hexagon punch. And again, I'm making the arrow point at one end by holding my hexagon punch upside down and then sliding the strip through the opening of the hexagon and into the corner points in the middle and punching. And then repeating the process to make the notch on the bottom edge. Now you could also use your scissors and just freehand cut these points and notches. I do that a lot too. It's quick and it's easy. However, the beauty of using these punches, especially for this particular design where they are going to be arranged together in a pattern, is that you get uniform points and notches by using a punch. After I have all of my arrow pieces, I'm going to start laying them out and arranging them on the layout. For right now, I'm not using adhesive. I'm just laying them out to make sure I have a somewhat even spread of the colors and patterns. The design of this is going to be made up of 11 columns of arrow strips that have kind of a random mix of the two different sizes. So each column is a different height on the layout. And another fun idea would be to use just one size of these arrow strips and create even columns. Now, when I'm happy with the arrangement, I usually take a picture of how it looks so I can reference back to it when building the layout. It just seems to make it so much easier because I'm never going to remember how all of these pieces were laid out. I'm going to start arranging these strips in the middle first. There is one column of the arrow strips that should be just right smack in the middle of the layout. So I'm using my OmniGrid ruler to find the center of the layout and then draw a few pencil lines to help me line up those first few arrow strips for easier placement. Anytime I am creating a patterned background like this, I always start in the middle first and work my way out to the edges. This way you are more likely to end up with a perfectly centered background design. Sometimes if you start on an edge of the design and then by the time you get to the other side, the margins might be off and then you're stuck with an off-centered design. And I just find it so much easier to start in the middle and to take care that it's centered well, and then the rest is fairly easy. After the middle column is adhered, I start working my way to the right side of the layout by adding one column of these arrow strips at a time. And I'm just trying to eyeball similar spacing between each strip, but I'm not being a perfectionist about it. I do occasionally use my ruler just to make sure that I'm staying straight with these strips. And I'm not worried necessarily about perfection, but I do want it to at least be close. When creating designs like this, if you are off with one of the middle strips, by the time you get to the last one, you might be really off. So I just like to double check and make sure I'm on the right track as I go along. Now that I am finishing up the right side of the layout, I can move on to filling in the left side of the layout, again using that middle column as my starting point to work out from. I've also distressed the edges of each of these strips. You can do this with a distressing tool or you can just use your fingernail. That's what I do, and it's really fast. I always like the look of the distressed edge, especially with designs like this that have lots and lots of pieces. It helps define those edges and make the shape of the strips stand out more. After I have all of these strips adhered on the layout, next I'm going to add my lines for stitching. I want to add some hand stitch lines on each column of the arrow strips, so I'm going to use a ruler and a pencil to draw those lines. And I'm not going to do anything with these just yet. It's just easier to do this part before you add anything else to the layout. Now I'm going to add my photos. I'm using two 2.5 by 3.5 inch photos with a 2 by 2 inch accent photo. I'm going to overlap all of them. The two wallet size photos are tilted, and then the 2 by 2 inch photo is going to be straight and kind of tucked under the other two. With my photos down, now I can move on to the next step of my stitching. I'm first laying my layout on a foam mat and piercing holes with a paper piercer. And the reason I put the photos on first is that there's no use in piercing holes or stitching in areas that are going to be covered by those photos. So I always put my photos down first and then add my stitching. After all of those holes are pierced, I use an eraser to erase those pencil lines. I'm going to use white embroidery floss, so this will keep the floss clean and without any lead smudges from those pencil lines. To add the stitching, I'm using 3 strands of 6-strand embroidery floss. I always recommend using 3 strands over 6. Not only does your thread last longer, but it's so much easier to pull through the holes than 6, which in turn helps to keep you from wrinkling your paper as you stitch. When the thread is hard to pull through, then you tend to hold your paper with a tighter grip, and that's where you will get those wrinkles. I start by anchoring the thread on the back side of the layout, and then I stitch through the holes using a back stitch. A back stitch will create a continuous line of stitching with none of the gaps. To do this stitch, you go up the next available hole and then back down the one behind it. Then you go up the next hole and back down the one behind it. You are moving forward under the layout and then moving backward above the layout. It's really, really easy once you get the hang of it. So the stitching on this design was really simple, so it really didn't take that long. I think I spent 30 to 45 minutes on it. When I get to the end of the stitching, I again anchor it to the back side of the layout with a small piece of masking tape. Next, I'm going to add my title piece. I'm starting off with a die cut title, and then I added the summer sticker to the top edge, and I'm placing it just below the photos. I'm also going to add another phrase sticker with foam adhesive in between the die cut title piece and the summer sticker. I love layering different title pieces like this. I'm also going to add a wave border sticker along the bottom edge of the title piece. The sticker sheet that came with this collection had a 12-inch wave border, and so I cut it into a smaller piece for my title. And then I also added a palm tree just above the title. Now I'm going to add some of the flower stickers and small details to finish out this design around the photos. I love using clusters and popped up details to help frame and highlight the photos on my layout. There were several starfish and small flower stickers that ended up being great accents to this design. The next detail I'm going to add is my journaling. I've cut it into strips and I'm adhering them with foam adhesive just above the photos. I always love how you can stagger and wrap journaling strips around the details on your layouts or in your photos. This is always my go-to preferred journaling method. The last details I'm going to add are some finishing touches. I'm adding a few enamel dots to the flowers and kind of around the embellishment cluster and title pieces. And then I add a few more word and phrase stickers by the title and the flower embellishment near the top. And that completes this layout. If you have never used 6x6 or 6x8 inch paper pads on full-size layouts, I highly, highly recommend you give it a shot. There are so many benefits to these smaller papers, and they are so fun for creating detailed designs like this. I often find that when I create with these paper pads, my layout always comes together so much faster. And I'm not a fast scrapbooker at all, so that's a huge benefit to me. Plus, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, with the small patterns, you can get away with smaller pieces to build your designs. And while you might think that these papers are limiting because they are smaller, they really aren't limiting at all. You just have to approach design by thinking outside of the box and asking yourself, how can I build a bigger design with smaller pieces? And you'll probably be amazed at the different ideas you can come up with when you approach it that way. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I hope you have a fantastic International Scrapbook Day.